I, 26 years old, female, met my husband, 27 years old, male, in high school. In senior year, I became pregnant. I decided to keep my baby, and we had a daughter together just as we were graduating. When our daughter turned 1, we realized that our relationship was no longer working and decided to go our separate ways. During our separation, both of us started seeing other people and both got into serious relationships. I became pregnant again at 22 with my ex's baby and gave birth to a beautiful daughter. This relationship ended due to infidelity, not on my part. In the following months, my husband's relationship during the separation also fell apart and they ended things. 2 years ago, my husband and I rekindled our relationship and eloped shortly after. The daughter I had with my ex has no contact with her biological father, as per his wishes, and refers to my husband as Dad. When my husband and I announced that we were back together, and I introduced my mother-in-law, Emil, to my second daughter, who is not biologically my husband's, she would not look directly at my daughter. I thought this was weird, but brushed it off and didn't want to make a fuss. For the last 2 years, she has continuously treated our second daughter differently from our first. For example, she always buys bigger birthday and Christmas presents for our eldest, surprises our eldest with activities just for them too, and excludes the youngest. I have brought this up with my husband, who also thought it was strange. We have both raised this issue with my mother-in-law on several occasions, but she claims that she didn't mean to exclude our youngest daughter and just feels more connected to our eldest. This hurt me for my youngest daughter, but then again, some people have stronger relationships than others, and my husband seemed to accept this answer. So I didn't push the subject. Recently, I started a new job. With my old job, I was able to work from home and look after our daughters at the same time. However, this new job has a longer commute and requires me to be in the office during the week. As a result, my mother-in-law has been looking after our daughters before and after school until my husband or I pick them up from her house. Whenever I am the one to pick up the girls, they are often angry and snappy, particularly my eldest. I've chalked this down to a long day at school and feeling exhausted, and I have tried not to take it to heart. However, 3 days ago, when I brought the girls home from their grandma's and made them a snack, I gave my eldest toast with too much butter, and she went into hysterics, screaming at me, "Useless war." My daughter is 8 years old. No 8-year-old should know that word or use it towards their mother. I knew that she had to have learned that from somewhere. That night, in bed, I told my husband about it, and he suddenly went quiet and got defensive, shutting down the conversation quickly. At first, I assumed from his reaction that he had said it to our daughter, so I asked her where she heard those new words when I didn't butter her toast evenly. To my surprise, she told me that it was my mother-in-law who used those words to describe me often, to our daughters. I was livid. I took an early leave from work that day to be there to collect my daughters from school to ensure they were nowhere near my mother-in-law. When my husband came home from work, I confronted him about what our daughter had told me, and he confirmed that his mom had called me a useless whore to him before, after she found out I had a daughter with another man during our separation. He said that she believes our youngest daughter is not part of her family, and that I am a whore for getting myself pregnant with someone who was not her son. The useless part comes from not being on birth control when I was a senior to prevent myself from getting pregnant in my teenage years. I have never been more angry and upset. It all makes sense to me now. The exclusion, the bigger gifts for our eldest, the anger displayed towards me when I pick them up, it all stems from how this woman has spoken about me to my own children. I told my husband that the children will never see his mom again, and I will gladly make other arrangements for them. My mother-in-law has called and texted a lot, attempting to apologize to me, but then she turned to outright denial, followed by defensive opinions about our youngest daughter's conception after I refused to acknowledge her texts. My husband says to give her another chance, and I cannot be certain that she has been saying these things about me to our children, which I think is bullshit, because he has admitted that she has used those words. He says I'm a major jerk for refusing his mother any contact with her granddaughters, even if it is supervised. Maybe he is right about supervised visitation, but I never want to see this woman again. Maybe it is just the anger talking, and I will feel differently if I hear my mother-in-law out. Am I the jerk? Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Not the idiot, obviously, but as they say here in Reddit land, you have a husband problem along with the mother-in-law problem. When you told your husband about what your daughter said, he knew exactly where she got it from, or he wouldn't have gotten defensive. Then when you told him that your daughter said it was mother-in-law, he admitted to knowing that she was talking negatively about you behind your back, and he did nothing to defend you or to put her in her place. Then he gaslights you into making you feel bad about setting boundaries, which are completely appropriate, by the way. Mother-in-law sounds awful, but why would you want to be married to such a doormat who won't even tell his own mother to back off in defense of his wife and tries to convince you that you are in the wrong? You need to have a very frank discussion with your husband about where his loyalties lie. Then, depending on how he reacts, I think you have some bigger decisions to make for yourself. Comment 2. Okay, there are 3 things in one that make this go from bad to worse. Your husband allows someone to call his wife, the woman he loves and married, a useless intimacy worker. It's his mother that does this, and she does it in front of his children. Why is he allowing anyone to talk about his wife like that? And why is he allowing his children to be poisoned against his wife? You have 2 problems, your mother-in-law and your husband. Now for the update. Hey everyone, thanks for all the comments on my last post. I really appreciated the support and advice. A lot has happened in the past 3 days, and I'm still trying to process it all. After my last update, things escalated quickly. My husband and I had a huge argument about his mother's behavior. He kept insisting that we should give her another chance, but I couldn't get past the fact that she had been so cruel to me and our daughters. I reminded him of the time when we first got back together, how his mom had been cold to me, and how he had promised that we would be a team and stand up for each other. It seemed like he had forgotten all about that promise. The next day, my eldest daughter broke down and told me more about what had been happening at my mother-in-law's house. She said that my mother-in-law had been telling her that she was the real granddaughter and that her sister wasn't actually part of the family. My heart broke hearing that. I couldn't believe she would say such things to a child. It was clear that my mother-in-law's actions were not just a series of misunderstandings, but a deliberate attempt to divide our family. I decided to have a heart-to-heart with my youngest daughter. She's always been a quiet child, more sensitive than her sister. She admitted that she felt left out and could tell that Grandma didn't like her as much. She asked me if it was because she had a different dad. I reassured her that she was loved just as much as her sister, but inside, I was fuming. How could my mother-in-law make a child question her place in the family? That night, my husband came home with a look on his face that I couldn't quite read. He sat me down and confessed something that shook me to my core. He told me that during our separation, he had a one-night stand with someone who turned out to be a close friend of my mother-in-law. He had never mentioned it before because the woman moved away shortly after, and he didn't think it was relevant since we were separated at the time. But here's the twist. The woman had gotten pregnant and had a child, a boy, who was now about the same age as our youngest daughter. My mother-in-law had been secretly visiting her grandson and had been comparing my daughters to him. She felt guilty for treating her grandson differently and had been overcompensating with our eldest daughter while taking out her frustration on me and our youngest. I was in shock. My husband had another child out there, a half-brother to our daughters, and my mother-in-law had been keeping this secret from us while poisoning our family against each other. I couldn't believe that she would go to such lengths to hide the truth. The confrontation that followed was intense. My husband was apologetic and ashamed. He had no idea that his mother had been visiting his son or that she had been treating our daughters so differently because of it. He agreed that his mother's behavior was unacceptable and that we needed to protect our daughters from her toxicity. We decided to cut contact with my mother-in-law for the time being. It was a difficult decision, but we needed to focus on our family and the well-being of our daughters. My husband reached out to the mother of his son to try and establish a relationship with him, and we're currently figuring out how to explain this to our daughters. As for my mother-in-law, she's been trying to reach out, but I've blocked her number. I can't even begin to think about forgiving her for the hurt she's caused. My husband is still processing the revelation about his son and the role his mother played in all of this. And my partner and I open our relationship to spice things up before marriage, but post-wedding, the bedroom's dead. So I surprise them at work, and we fight over a coworker, but now we're trying couples therapy. When my wife and I first started seeing each other, we had a really active intimacy life. We actually started off as friends with benefits. As our relationship developed over the years, it slowly tapered off to the point of us going months at a time without any intimacy, and things starting to feel more like a roommate situation than a relationship. We've had multiple conversations about it over the years, to the point where we decided to open the relationship for a little while prior to our engagement. I didn't act on it much, less than 5 times easily. But once the engagement and marriage happened, we closed things off again with an understanding that we would work on improving our intimacy life. But it honestly never changed. It's gotten to a point now where it's been over a year since we've been sexually active. I tried to have a conversation with her about it again, but all I got back was, "I can't help it." I didn't take it offensively, but it did sting a little bit. My love language is physical touch, and the lack of intimacy has been really damaging to my own confidence and has made me feel really disconnected from her. I don't want to come off as this nag or that all I want is intimacy. Shoot, I'd even be happy if we had makeout sessions every now and then. She said she would talk to her doctor and even try some over-the-counter supplements to boost her libido. But it never lasts longer than a week, and she just goes back to the same story. It always feels like an excuse. I hate that it's gotten to this point, and I love her so much. I'd rather be celibate than leave her, but I'm struggling and don't know what to do. So, am I the jerk? Edit. I realize I didn't clarify our ages, genders. We are both 32-year-old females. The open relationship was decided to only be open on one side, mine, and was agreed upon after a serious conversation where I had mentioned how impactful it had been to me that we weren't being sexually active, that I didn't want to leave but didn't know what else to do if we couldn't find a solution. The concept was suggested by her initially, then discussed down the line and agreed upon by both of us after determining rules. There are tons of mentions of therapy, which I'm a huge advocate for. I've asked her to consider it for years, and she had just agreed to individual therapy a year ago, but hasn't picked it back up since we have relocated. But when asked about if she will start again, she still seems open to it. We also have tried couples therapy for a short period of time, but neither of us liked the therapist and stopped. That's another option we will be revisiting in the future. I personally go to individual therapy regularly and recently just started broaching this topic in my last session. Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Could she have depression maybe, or a hormone imbalance? An honest conversation with her doctor sounds necessary. If you have had the level of healthy intimacy in the past, it sounds like something medical could be the cause. A new birth control perhaps? Or maybe go and get testing from a therapist to see if something else is going on. Marriages are hard work sometimes. Comment 2. Not the idiot. I am the wife with the very low libido in my relationship. I have to actively work on improving things. It's not fair to my husband or my relationship to just throw in the towel and say I can't do anything about it. I do have medical issues that affect it, but I try to make things better. I've actually tried aroused goat Zaza tablets, which actually helped. Now for the update. Hey everyone, thanks for all the comments and advice on my last post. It's been a week since I shared my story, and boy do I have some updates for you. So after I posted last time, my wife and I had another heart-to-heart. I reminded her of how we used to sneak around when we first met, the thrill of our secret rendezvous fueling our passion. She actually smiled at the memory, which gave me a glimmer of hope. We decided to try and recreate some of that early excitement by planning a secret date night at home. The night started off great. We cooked dinner together, something we hadn't done in ages. It was like we were back in our first tiny apartment, bumping into each other in the cramped kitchen. But as the evening wore on, the old patterns started to emerge. She seemed distracted, and eventually she said she was tired and headed to bed early, leaving me alone with the dishes and my thoughts. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the open relationship we had before our engagement. It was her idea, a way to give me what I needed while she worked through her own issues. I remembered how it felt like a Band-Aid solution even then, but I was desperate to hold on to our connection. The next day, I decided to take a different approach. I brought up the idea of revisiting couples therapy, suggesting we find a new therapist that we both liked. She agreed, but her lack of enthusiasm was evident. It was like she was going through the motions, saying yes to appease me. In the meantime, I continued my individual therapy sessions. My therapist suggested that I focus on self-care and find ways to build my confidence outside of my relationship. I started hitting the gym more regularly, which did help me feel better about myself. Then, 2 days ago, I came home early from work and found my wife in a state I hadn't seen her in for a long time. She was dressed up, makeup done, looking like she was ready for a night out. My heart raced, thinking maybe she was planning a surprise for us. But then she told me she was going out with friends from work. I felt a pang of jealousy and confusion. Why hadn't she put in this effort for our date night? I tried to shake off the feeling and spent the evening alone, watching TV and trying not to think about it. When she came home, she was in high spirits, and for a moment, it felt like the old days. She was affectionate, hugging me and telling me about her night. But when I tried to turn the affection into something more, she pulled away, saying she was too drunk and needed to sleep. The next morning, things were back to normal, or our new normal anyway. She was distant again, and I was left feeling like I'd imagined the whole thing. Yesterday, I decided to surprise her at work with lunch. I thought maybe a midday visit might spark something between us. When I got there, I saw her laughing with a coworker. They were close, a little too close for my liking. My mind raced with suspicions. Was this why she'd been so distant? Was there someone else? I confronted her about it when she got home. The argument that followed was intense. She was shocked and hurt that I would think she was cheating. She explained that the coworker was just a good friend, someone who made her laugh, and that there was nothing inappropriate going on. I felt like a fool. I had let my insecurities get the best of me. We talked it out, and she reassured me that she loved me and that she was committed to working on our relationship. She even suggested we schedule our first couples therapy session for next week. My daughter cries when she sees her grandma. But when I overhear her plan to secretly adopt my child, I realize why she's trying so hard to bond. And I haven't told my husband. My husband and I have a 5-month-old daughter who hates my mother-in-law. Every time she comes over, my daughter screams to high heavens and does not stop until my mother-in-law is out of view. My daughter doesn't do this when it comes to literally anyone else. My husband thinks it's because his mom doesn't come over often enough. She's here no less than once a week, but usually 2 times a week, and literally no one comes over as often as she does. Everyone else has only met our daughter at most twice. His opinion is not valid here. Not because I don't respect his opinion, of course, but because she is here often, and my daughter still hates her. My daughter has met my mother twice, and she basically wrestles to get out of my arms to get to her and smiles/giggles the entire time. She truly just doesn't like my mother-in-law. I personally cannot stand when my mother-in-law comes over anymore. My husband and his mom try forcing a bond by passing my daughter to my mother-in-law and having her rock her and try to soothe her as she's holding her breath and screaming the entire time. But it really set my irritation in stone when my mother-in-law said today, "Cry all you want, you won't get your way. I don't play that game," and walked out of the room as my daughter was reaching for me. I instantly took her back and said, "No, you're mistaken. I don't play the game you are playing," and told them both that from now on, the second my daughter starts screaming, she is to be passed back to me. I'm no longer allowing this "we need to force a bond" BS. Well, before my mother-in-law left today, my husband said, "Maybe you should come by more often, even when I'm at work, because the more my daughter sees you, the more she will recognize you, and the bond will happen eventually." I stepped in and said I'm not okay with that. His mother is here often enough, and when he's at work, I don't want anyone here. Not only is it my downtime, but it's also when I'm working. I work from home, and I don't want anyone here. My husband said, "Yeah, but she could help you by watching the baby while you work." I told him it doesn't help me to listen to my baby scream bloody unalive, actually. And once again, it's not happening. She can stick to her usual of coming over when he's here, and that's it. He says I'm purposely ruining the chance of a bond between his mom and baby. I'm doing no such thing, though. She doesn't like her, and having her come here more often than she already does will just mean that my baby is going to be screaming a lot more. Am I the idiot? Etta, my mother-in-law is a kick-ass woman. I have always gotten along with her and always bragged to people that I lucked out because I don't have a toxic relationship with her like all the other people I know have with their mothers-in-law. My daughter is not feeding off of my dislike for my mother-in-law. She has never liked her. I don't know why, obviously, but it doesn't change the fact that my daughter screams every time she sees her. I am irritated with my mother-in-law's presence now, but only because she sees my daughter holding her breath and screaming and refuses to get out of her face and continues to try and force my daughter to accept her. It still doesn't make me hate my mother-in-law, but it does make me dread her coming around the baby. My husband suggesting she come here to help me by watching the baby while he's working would quite literally do the opposite of help. I'm not going to allow my daughter to scream like that. And I definitely won't get any work done. Ida, again, it's not a scent issue. My mother-in-law wears all unscented products due to a skin condition. It might be the sound of her voice. She's very high-pitched. Just today, my daughter was sitting in her playseat in the living room and started screaming before my mother-in-law even had time to cross the threshold into the room. So it's definitely not a scent thing. Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1, not the idiot. My niece was like this with my youngest sister. She would scream bloody unalive, and my sister felt like she hated her. But around 2, she flipped a switch, and suddenly she loved her auntie as much as the rest of us. They have a funny relationship, to be honest, full of silly arguments and dad jokes. You cannot force a baby to like someone. You just have to let her grow used to grandma in her own sweet time. They're far more likely to mess this up than you are. Comment 2. You have a massive husband problem. He is treating you like this and traumatizing his infant Matt. He is being a shitty husband and a horrible father. Have him talk to the pediatrician about forcing a baby into this situation repeatedly and what it is doing to the baby's mental well-being. She is learning she is not safe, that her mommy and daddy won't save her when she's hysterical. How is that a good thing to teach a baby? Now, for the update. Hey everyone. Back with an update on the whole mother-in-law and baby situation. It's been a busy couple of weeks, and I've got some news that'll knock your socks off. So, after the last incident, things cooled down for a bit. My husband and I had a long talk about boundaries and respecting our daughter's comfort levels. He seemed to get it, and we agreed that his mom wouldn't try to force interactions anymore. But, old habits die hard. The next visit from my mother-in-law was surprisingly quiet. She came in, didn't immediately reach for the baby, and just sat down. My daughter didn't scream this time, which was a first. I was cautiously optimistic, thinking maybe we'd turned a corner. But then, as if on cue, the moment my mother-in-law started talking, my daughter's face scrunched up and she let out a wail that could wake the dead. It was like she had a sixth sense for that voice. Now, here's where things get juicy. My husband's brother, who's always been the family's black sheep, came by unexpectedly one day. He's the kind of guy who travels a lot and never really settled down. We hadn't seen him since before the baby was born, and he was excited to meet his niece. The moment he walked in, my daughter's eyes lit up. She reached out for him, all smiles and giggles. It was so strange, seeing her react like that to someone she'd never met. But then my brother-in-law started talking to her, cooing and making faces, and I nearly dropped my coffee mug. His voice, it was the same high pitch as my mother-in-law's. Yet my daughter was eating it up, laughing and cooing back. It was like watching a mini soap opera unfold in my living room. This got me thinking. Maybe it wasn't the pitch of the voice that was the problem. I started paying closer attention to my mother-in-law's interactions with the baby. That's when I noticed it wasn't just the voice, it was the tone. My mother-in-law always had this commanding, almost abrasive tone, like she was used to being in charge and having people listen. My brother-in-law, on the other hand, spoke softly, with warmth and a lot of love in his voice. I brought this up to my husband, and he brushed it off at first. But then, he started noticing it too. We decided to test a theory. The next time his mom came over, he asked her to try talking to our daughter in a softer, gentler tone. You could tell it wasn't easy for her, but she gave it a shot. And would you believe it? My daughter didn't scream. She was a bit hesitant at first, but there were no tears. It was a breakthrough, and my husband was over the moon, thinking we'd solved the puzzle. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Now, remember how I said things got wild? Well, hold on to your hats. A few days ago, my mother-in-law was over, and everything was going fine until she got a phone call. She stepped out of the room to take it, and I overheard her talking about some family secret. My curiosity got the better of me, and I eavesdropped. I know, not my proudest moment. Turns out, my mother-in-law had another child before she married my father-in-law. A daughter she gave up for adoption. I was floored. This was huge, and nobody in the family knew about it. She was talking about how this daughter had reached out to her, wanting to meet, and how she was terrified of the family finding out. I was still processing this news when my mother-in-law came back into the room. She must have seen the look on my face because she knew I'd heard. We locked eyes, and she just broke down, confessing everything to me. She was so scared of what this would do to the family, especially her relationship with my husband. I was torn. This was a massive secret to keep, and it explained so much about her behavior. She was trying so hard to connect with my daughter because of the guilt and regret she felt for giving up her first child. I haven't told my husband yet. I'm not sure how to even begin that conversation, but I know I can't keep this to myself. It's not just about my mother-in-law and me anymore. It's about our whole family. If you like this video, you'll probably like these too. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing. It's your support that keeps this channel alive and allows me to make better and longer videos. Have a great day.